glad to be here. It's good to see you here. And as indicated, this press briefing is purely about the demonetization that was started on June 1, 2019. And that is the day the new generation banknotes were launched. And also at that time, we announced the withdrawal of the old series 1,000 banknotes, 1,000 Kenya shillings banknotes, by end of September, meaning that by October 1, on October 1, those notes that, all those notes, those old series would be worthless. So in terms of preliminaries, demonetization really is about, it's a big word, but it's actually a very simple concept. It's about the removal of the status of legal tender on a particular currency unit. As you can imagine, a piece of paper becomes legal tender through, at least for us here, through a gazette notice, according to specific legal mandates by the central bank. And consequently, it also loses its value as currency, meaning as legal tender, again, by the same process, which is what we followed in this case. Now, again, as preliminaries, demonetization is done for a variety of reasons. And in our case here, there were two reasons that we put out, which is we needed to deal with the usage or rather to deal with the illicit cash flows, the illicit financial flows in Kenya and other countries that we had already seen, and some emerging, and a lot of them, or some of them, were using the Kenya currency as their currency of choice. Also, they were using the US dollar as a currency of choice, but those two, so we needed to deal with it. And I think you have, through your various investigations, some of you have actually raised some of these issues, maybe just saw them and walked away. But anyway, they deserve investigation, not just by you, but in particular by the law enforcement agencies. That was one issue. The second one was we also saw the emergence of counterfeiters. And the banknote of choice was the 1,000. The old series. And I think a lot of you have also seen that in the newspapers. There's been reports about counterfeiters that have been caught and so forth. So we needed to deal with that conclusively. And the blow that was struck was the withdrawal of those currencies, of those old bills, as I mentioned a moment ago. It's interesting that some of us may ask questions, but it's interesting that this message has gone to the farthest corners, understanding why is it that we are doing this, the reason for it. Are we just doing this to destabilize your financial position or whatever else it is? Absolutely not. And a good way of, I was in Lunga Lunga, the farthest corner towards Mombasa, towards Tanzania, in Kwale constituency. And in the market there, when we had our road show, a lady told me, in the crowd, and she speaks and said, "Usiregeshe kamba." I hope that doesn't need in translation. Basically, she fully understood the benefit that she, a trader in Lunga Lunga, would benefit, or conversely, was losing and would actually it would be detrimental to her if actually the procedure, or let's say the demonetization, was not successful. So in that sense, it was extremely important, and I think for a lot of us who have even more data would appreciate that even more. But let's move on. Now, in designing the demonetization strategy, we look keenly at the experience of other countries. We wanted to learn from them. So please make no mistake, we didn't just wake up in the morning and decide we are going to do X or Y or Z. It was actually a quite detailed examination and appreciation. Now, there are two general approaches to demonetization. One is a sort of, you want to call it a shock approach, where you demonetize overnight. And you generally do this. This happens, for instance, when there are significant dislocations in the economy, right? We can discuss the examples, but in the interest of time, I'll breeze quickly through this. And the other one is the more gradual approach, which the point here is to minimize the disruptions to the economy and also to enhance the effectiveness in addressing the end point, the objectives, that is in our case, corruption, and indeed money laundering or tax evasion, if that's what you have in mind when you institute the demonetization. So, and we actually looked very carefully at the more recent examples, and the one that obviously all of you have talked about is the example of India. Somehow we've all focused on the example of India, but as I have said, and I mentioned this before, we did have a very detailed look at that. And I guess also most commentators remain traumatized by that example. Anyway, we did look at that example very carefully. I would also say that the governor of the Reserve Bank of India, who was there when they instituted this, is somebody I know very well. We went to the same school. He was a year ahead of me. He is Kenyan, believe it or not. Now maybe he's changed his passports, but and we have had I had a lot of conversations with him. So not only the written material, but we also had a lot of let's say intimate understanding of what happened there. Okay, let's move on. Most commentators, obviously, on this, when you look at the Indian example, there are a few things that come up. The first, of course, is that it was an immediate sort of immediate demonetization with 2 months to change from the now non-currency to something that you can use for transactions. And also there were the long lines. I think this was carried in the various media stories, pictures of long lines, a bit like ourselves when you go voting, long lines snaking around the neighborhood and all that. There was also problems that popped up, people buying the old currency, what was the old currency at a discount. AML, CFT, this is anti-money laundering, sort of measures were not fully deployed. So there are some specific concerns that so what were the lessons? From our perspective, it was clear that the immediate withdrawal, that's the shock approach, dislocated transactions with potentially large economic effects. And this is why we went the gradual approach, right? And also, remember we were doing this at a time when we were introducing a new currency. So it was important to also be aware as to what will happen, in terms of public appreciation of the new currency and things like that. The other thing that was important, that another lesson from this is that there should be enough cash. So you should not get to a point where you are running out of banknotes, and then it undermines your demonetization. That's how you end up having long lines. That's how you end up having problems at the ATM and things like that. Another point, a third point, is that there was a need for a strong anti-money laundering, combating of financing of terrorism, acronym AML CFT measures, a framework that is deployed not just on the books, but actually one that is operating. And finally, number 4 is a very strong communication strategy, very strong. Not just a strategy, but actually implement a very strong communication stance. So if you look at what we did, all these elements were there. So in a sense, these lessons were part of our appreciation. And from day one, we had this in mind. Now, there are questions, of course, that some of you asked. We gave it 4 months, and some of you have asked, well, was 4 months enough? Or could we say, or was it too much? Maybe we should have done 2 months. Maybe we should have done 3. And this is where there is a balance, okay? So we had to strike a balance between being overly generous for the common mwananchi, Wanjiko, allowing a lot of time there for them to convert, and on the other side, providing too much room for illicit transactors to, say, go around the fences that we are trying to, or the measures that we are trying to put in place. So it's really a balance, and we struck the balance at 4 months, and I think that is what you can see in the, well, that's what was announced and so forth. How can I then explain the background? I'm sorry, I'm still going on the background because it is important. And here I would ask, I will not name names, but be patient, please. Let's do a good job. Let's start from the start and go to the end. So this doesn't appear like, where's the meat? Where's the substance? Please be patient, because this is substance. I don't want us to have questions about how we did things. So that's why I'm belaboring these points. Okay, let's move on. How did we proceed? So now this is the process part. We've already dealt with the ideas, what was there and what underpinned the demonetization, but how did we progress? And I think here is where we had a multi-layered strategic approach. It's important to appreciate that. It is a strategic approach, so it wasn't random, but it is multi-layered. And then we executed it with a lot of vigor and precision. That's what I would say. So you begin with a very deep bench, for those of you that like sports, particularly basketball. You have a deep bench. You don't go with one, you know, if it is basketball, just having 5 people. No, no, no. You want to have actually 14. And any one of them, you can bring them in. So that's the multi-layered approach. And it is strategic. You have a plan. You have a game plan. You know, you have, for this drive, you know what you're doing. It's not just a random moving in the field. That was the first thing, multi-layered strategic approach. The second element, so we executed it with vigor and precision. The second element of this was extensive and regular feedback. It was essential to get feedback. So we didn't just roll it off and then just wait for the outcomes. We were getting feedback, and I think some of you have already seen how some of the feedback was coming. And then we had a tactical response to what was going on. So the feedback comes, and then we have to respond tactically, putting the right measures to deal with that issue or that problem, or when we see that a particular measure is getting a lot of traction, then giving it even more energy so that we can get all directed to the objectives that I mentioned before. All right, so let's move to so when we started off then, priority number 1, obviously, so I'll now talk about, to sort of give some details on this. Priority number 1 was to make sure that everyone is aware of the new banknotes. Remember, we were issuing new generation banknotes, aware of them, and also the security features. So that was priority number 1. And as you can imagine, we started off through, let's say, on TV, on that very day, on social media and things like that. We'll come back to that in detail. The second priority was to make sure that the banknotes are widely available, including, of course, recalibrating ATMs, and so that they can actually provide the cash, the new generation banknotes. Obviously, this was done over a period of time. it doesn't happen sort of at the push of a button. We need to provide the data to the people that take care of the ATMs and so forth, and they have to go ATM by ATM. It's a bit lengthy, but that was second priority. And then the third priority was pushing awareness of the security features. You have to continue pushing this. And the withdrawal. And we did this in a layered manner, right? So culminating with heavy presence in the airwaves, radio that is, in the vernacular stations, radio stations. Now, I want to insist that this was a multi-layered approach. It was multi-layered with many actors and many channels. For instance, in terms of the public awareness, we had, and I won't go through all of them, but we actually did a lot of work in the first week on TV, on radio, some radio, at least the main Swahili stations, and also the English stations. And also very heavy on social media. And then very soon, we also put out posters. Every single school got one. If you went to every single chief's camp or the assistant chief's camp, there were posters. If you went to any agent of a bank out there, and indeed even the banks themselves, there were posters about this. This is the first few weeks already. So people knew that. And the other thing we did, of course, was to put out some shillings out there, meaning the banknotes, in the first week or the first few weeks. So what we did is to distribute the banknotes around the country so that people could get a sense of it, a handle of it, kama kionjo, right? I guess that's what you say when you get a piece of meat, before you buy it, right? Patia kionjo or something like that. And that was important. But I think we continued, it wasn't just that, so every single administrative office had it. I don't want to go through all of it, but you also know that we went very heavy on road shows. This is why we talked about being in the various places. It's been many years since I attended a chief's baraza, but I attended one in Garissa. They haven't changed. The last time I attended a chief's baraza was in 1982, when I was a university student, and rather difficult circumstances, I would admit. But anyway, so we had that. We also went heavy in terms of in the road shows, in all sorts of ways. We've moved from around the country, from Kondere in Kisumu to Lunga, to Ajir, all those places and other places in between. We've also been to Narok. I've never danced with Morans before, but this particular day I did. So there are many channels that we use for communicating this. On TV, I think I have been, on radio I have had, I think 27 interviews on radio, using the vernacular radio stations. We've also been appearing in various ways, ads in more than 70, I think the last count was 79. How many? 15,000 adverts. And how many radio stations were we on? 82 radio stations. Bottom line is, in all this, it's impossible for you to say that you're in a particular place in Kenya and for 4 months you never heard about this. It is virtually impossible. I'm sure there's that one person who was in that whole, maybe a hermit or something, he stuck somewhere with. But I think the point is, that argument doesn't stand. Okay, that's one element. The other element that I need to bring to your attention is the very strong AML-CFT measures that were deployed by the various institutions. Now, when I say MLCFT measures, maybe for your audience, it's good to say what this is. And this is the measures that ensure when you bring money, you want to make a transaction, you should be ready to explain and to confirm that your money is legit, meaning it's not the proceeds of some criminal activity. Frankly, if my salary is 50, let's even say it's 100K, 100,000. I'm a senior official in some institution, whatever the institution is. And suddenly I'm banking cash 1.2 million. It begs the question. And you should be ready to answer, where is this cash coming from? And you can explain it. Maybe you sold a piece of property. Then explain, why was it cash? Why didn't you? All these things. But I think most of us that have no problems, never by definition don't have problems with these questions. It is those that have questionable sources of quote unquote income that actually will have trouble going through the filters or through the hurdles of this illicit, confirming that the flows are actually not from illicit transactions and so forth. But anyway, so these were implemented. Just to tell you why this was done well this time, it is because we've been working on it for about 2 years. Remember, we went way back, actually more than 2 years, more like 3 or 4 years. So we've been working with banks, and they've improved the way they conduct these measures. So this time around, they just continued and emphasized the measures in the area of cash. And it wasn't just banks. The other institutions, for instance, the forex bureaus, the foreign exchange bureaus, the payment system providers, or the microfinance banks, or the money remittance institutions. All those institutions are required, and we had required them and have been working with them to strengthen their measures. And this time around, they just continue. They strengthen, they enhance them. And we also included other things, which is weekly monitoring, weekly reporting. So they were reporting to us every week. They'll continue to do so. And we therefore had a very good handle, or should we say, feeling of the pulse of this whole process. Now, I think it is also worth saying that, it's amazing. It's not just explaining. Let's say I bring cash to a bank and I want to deposit in my bank account, or I want to buy foreign currency or whatever it is. And for whatever reason, I cannot explain the source of my funds. The bank can do many things. One could be just to say, well, okay, fine. It's not, they have to determine based on particular requirements that they have. They could say that, no, okay, I'm going to go through with it because but I'm going to file a suspicious transaction, right? Report. I'll say that this is a suspicious transaction. That's what I think some of us think the responsibility of the institution ends there. And that is where we go wrong. It doesn't end there. Actually, they can say, no, you keep the money. You keep the money. We are not going to transact your money. Because actually, what then happens is they too get a responsibility. They also are not, they are on the hook for that transaction. So in a sense, they can say, no, we are not going to do your transaction. No, not our bank. So you go home with your money. Shauri yako kind of thing. They can also do more, which is, take your money, and we are closing your account. You have 14 days to tell us where we are going to send you the money, but this transaction is going to be closed. Guess what? That actually happened. So it wasn't just filing, it was all these things. So in a sense, some of you wrote all sorts of interesting stories about, buying, how easy it is. You have all and it's always, I know somebody who, that's how the story goes. That's how it's written, right? I know somebody who bought a very expensive car, 6 million, with cash. Yeah, that is a good story. But the link with reality is quite far. Okay, that maybe should be filed under the fiction and not reality, right? Just that person, whoever you bought the car from, that trader or whatever it is, will have to deal with the cash in some ways, and they cannot bank it because they'll have to explain. And basically, it will be this, even though they are a very, let's say, fanciful motor car trading sort of shop or business, the banks actually the bank can refuse to accept it and even terminate that account, meaning, yeah, ask you to close your account and move on. I wanted to be clear about that, but we'll come back to that in a minute. Okay. Okay. So where are we? So just to give you then some numbers on where we are, but I think the first thing to say is that the demonetization process proceeded very well, very well. I think here we can say we used the Eliud Kipchoge principle. I think you all know Eliud Kipchoge, and his approach when he has spoken to us is plan and prepare. Plan and prepare, that is everything. So we took that and had planned and prepared, and then deployed. As I said, we took tactical measures as we got different information. And success then, if it comes, it comes. So I think the idea here is not to focus on the success, but to focus on the planning and preparation. And with that, I think I can only say that we did well. And we are happy with we are also happy with the outcome. And as you know, the process closed on September 30th. So we can say the demonetization process, the withdrawal process has ended. And I'll now give you some specific indications as to where we are. So first, just to give you some background numbers, the exchanges that we saw, and this is now using all the transactions set to Monday, of the transactions in 0 to, or let's say less than 500,000 Kenya shillings. In value terms, so now let's talk value. By the way, there will be a press release after this sometime today, which will, just to be sure that we don't get mixed up in the numbers. Numbers are important to all of us. But anyway, you can quote these numbers as you see fit. So in terms of values, so transactions that were less than 500K, in terms of values, there were 62%. So 62% of the transactions were less than 500K, 500,000. 79% of the transactions in value terms were less than 1 million. And if you even push the number, the level higher to 2 million, 92% of the transactions in value terms were less than 2 million. Now, in terms of numbers, if you think of how many transactions we did during this whole process, 96% of them were less than 500. So there are many, very many small transactions, 500,000 that is. And if you go to 1 million, it is, or let's just say 99% of the transactions were less than 1 million.